I'll just say a little bit about Tall Oaks before we start. We are celebrating 35 years of assisted living and memory care. We were the premier memory care in Reston, Virginia. We're still going strong. And, you know, we are a valid resource for those in the community. And our goal and my goal personally are to help educate everyone so that they can make the best decisions for themselves and their families. And that's why we're here tonight. So I thank Aaron, I thank Daniel, and we have Mark, who has come in as a panelist today, a financial advisor, to answer some questions on the back end. We found we had some questions that popped up on the first one that it might be important to have someone that's experienced and seasoned to answer those questions in the second one. So without further ado, I throw it back to you, Steve, and then to the group.
Yeah. So yeah, our cast of characters here is I'm with Positive Aging community, and I'm just the behind the scenes voice that you'll hear if we have any questions or technical difficulties. And then we've got Daniel Cronin from the Alzheimer's Association. Daniel, you want to talk about, just tell us what your title is and your role at Alzheimer's Association?
Sure, I'm happy to. Good evening. My name is Dan Cronin. I am a manager of programs and services for the National Capital Area Chapter Alzheimer's Association. And I have the pleasure of working with a very dedicated and committed and esteemed volunteer base. All of our programs and support services are volunteer-led. So we cannot function or exist without our invaluable volunteers. So tonight we have Aaron Schulman again, who will be presenting. As mentioned before, you don't need to have seen the first program in order to get some great information tonight from this program. So we're really happy to have you if you're coming back, or if you are this is your first program with us. Without further ado, I will transition over to Aaron Schulman. Thank you.
And I did drop that first recording into chat for everybody. But Aaron, take it away, and we will duck behind the curtain here.
All right, thanks, guys. Greatly appreciate that. And folks, as we're going through, if you have any questions, it could be for me, it could be for Mark, for any of us, feel free to type those in the chat, and we'll monitor those as we go forward. We will also be using some slides, and we're going to try to use a couple videos. We're going to see if those will work in terms of the audio quality. If they don't, then we'll just talk through those. What I'm going to do is we're going to do a very quick review of where we were on February 7th. That may help those that weren't here, but as you know, Steve and Dan have highlighted, you didn't have to be here, and Leslie mentioned as well, didn't have to be here on the 7th to get a lot of benefit out of tonight. What I'll then do, we'll talk a little bit about what we've covered. Then we're going to get into more about the importance of financial conversations. They can be very difficult to have. We'll talk about how to do it and why to do it. We'll then get into the potential of financial abuse with people that have dementia. And then we'll talk about addressing financial needs and plans and legal needs and plans. And then we'll open it up for Q&A at the end for myself, Dan, and Mark, and of course, Leslie and Steve as well. So any questions that you have at the end, we'll just open it up for anybody to do that. And with that, what I'm going to do here in a moment is share my screen, and I'm going to ask Steve, once I do this, if he is able to see my screen. So just give me a moment, and I'm going to go back. And let's see here.
You are looking good.
All right, very good. So the topic again is it's managing money, a caregiver's guide to finance. And for those that were here on the 7th, we talked about why this program. This has been something that's been a big issue nationwide for some time. So HHS actually had asked the association to take a lead in doing this type of program. And I'm going to show you a steering committee. It wasn't just the Alzheimer's Association, it was many organizations. But I do want to highlight, Mark is a professional. I am not a professional financial advisor nor a lawyer. So the program, it contains general information on legal and financial recommendations and guidance, but it does not mean to take place of professional advice. I want to re-highlight that. I am not an attorney, nor do I want to play an attorney, but a lot of the information that we have here is very valuable and has been validated, through a range of different organizations. And this was put together in about a year and a half, 2 years ago, with a range of folks, AARP, the National Alliance for Caregiving, and a whole host of other key nonprofits and organizations. And it was just extremely, extremely important to do this. But we also talked about on the 7th, we started to talk about the cost of caregiving and the impact on caregiving on the cost, I guess I would call it the financial impact on caregivers. So if you are going to be a caregiver or you are a caregiver, we sometimes don't realize the impact it's going to have on us financially. So we talked about that some people will have to go part-time. Some people will actually retire early. They don't appreciate the impact that being a caregiver might have because they have to spend that much more time with a loved one. They want to do that, they're going to do that, but it may affect their own financial planning. The other thing that happens is it may affect their health. Being a caregiver can be very difficult. It's extremely rewarding and can be very hard, but it's also, we got to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves if we're going to take care of our loved ones. So it's really, really important to keep that in mind. Now, before I talk about the impact on the ability to manage money, which we talked a little bit about, I want to highlight for those that weren't here on the 7th. We talk about Alzheimer's, we talk about the term dementia. Now, I just want to make sure folks understand that Alzheimer's is one type of dementia. I want to repeat that. Alzheimer's disease is one type of dementia. Dementia is a range of diseases that affect the brain in different ways, basically killing off neurons. We have about 100 billion neurons in our brain, and Alzheimer's affects the brain in one particular way. Other types of dementia, for example, there was Lewy body dementia. Lewy body dementia, for those that remember Robin Williams, the actor, he died by suicide, but he died because of what was going on through Lewy body dementia, personality changes, more so than memory effects. For those that just heard about Bruce Willis, there's another type of dementia, frontal temporal lobe, where the ability to understand or be able to speak effectively, memory may not be affected as much, but the dementia affects the brain in different ways. There's actually, as I mentioned, about 14 different types of dementia. Alzheimer's is the most common type. About 75% of all dementias are Alzheimer's. So we were talking a little bit about that last time. What happens though when someone does have Alzheimer's or another dementia, they may start having problems remembering to pay bills or doing them incorrectly, making financial mistakes. So early planning is really important for a person who might be having cognitive impairment. The other thing is, just because someone has a cognitive impairment doesn't mean that they have Alzheimer's or dementia. You want to get that person to their primary doctor to get assessed to find out what's going on. But we're making the assumption here that a person has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia. And, it's going to be, we were talking for a bit about the importance of early planning. And when we talk about early planning, this is where we ended on February 7th. The benefit is understanding that loved one's wishes. What do they want? How do they want to, the quality of life that they want to have? As things progress with the disease, because Alzheimer's and these other dementias are a fatal disease, unfortunately. Some people will live with the disease for just a few years. Others will live for up to 20 years with the disease. Average range, once a person has been diagnosed, is about 5 to 8 years. Once a person has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, the average lifespan is about 5 to 8 years. So we want to have those conversations early. You'll probably hear me mention that multiple times. So if we do it early, then those loved ones can be involved in their decisions. They'll have more cognizance of what they're saying and what they're doing. So it's really, really important. this is, again, what I was saying, it's a relief once you get those financial and legal plans in place. And I'm going to give you the example of my very good friends, Mark and Caroline. They didn't do the early planning. In fact, they were concerned. Their mom and dad had cognitive impairment and had recently been diagnosed with one with Alzheimer's, one with a different dementia. Mark and Caroline didn't want to rock the boat with their parents. They said, well, we'll just wait. We don't want to upset them. We don't want to have discussions about legal and financial. And they waited, not months. They waited almost 2 years. And by the time that they could really they needed to have the conversation about the wishes that their mom and dad had, it was getting to the point where almost the courts had to get involved. They didn't in this case, but it was very, very close to doing that because their mom and dad were starting to think that they were trying to steal their money, that they were trying to do things to them, and they didn't have clarity all the time. So the importance of having the conversations early with a loved one who may be diagnosed with Alzheimer's or another dementia is extremely, extremely important. In fact, one of the things that Dan and I often hear in the programs when we're doing these kinds of programs in the community, and as a volunteer educator, what I do a range of Alzheimer's programs throughout the national capital area. And I've been doing this for about 4.5 years. And a common theme is people say they wish they had had the conversations earlier with their loved one, whether it's a spouse, mom, dad, grandparent, other, friend, family. And the advice that they always say that they would give to someone who's a new caregiver is please have these conversations now, don't wait. So, but having a conversation about finances is really difficult for some. We have to be careful about how we do this. So say you've just recently been diagnosed or a loved one's been recently diagnosed, they might be uncomfortable about wanting to talk about finances. Or if it's a child, the child might be an adult child, the child might be 50 years old, 40 years old, whatever. The parent may still be a little nervous about talking about the finances, opening up all the information in the files. So we want to be appropriate in how we approach this because it can be really difficult for both the caregiver or caregiver's family, as well as that person who's been recently diagnosed. So when we start to have a conversation, we want to think about this. We want to think about the time, the place, what it is that we want to cover. We don't want to wing it. Again, what the recommendations are from the people that we talk with in other types of programs is think about your plan of what it is that you want to accomplish with your loved one in terms of, what are the goals? What is the financial plans? Is it where documents exist? What kinds of documents exist? Think about what you want to achieve in what kind of time frame. And you don't have to do it all at once, having these kind of conversations. But you do want to do it when things are calm, when you're calm. You want to understand your voice tone. If it's someone that has Alzheimer's or dementia, you may have to repeat yourself multiple times. You might have to have the conversation multiple times. And you want to let them know that you're there to help. It's not just that you, quote, want the information. You're there to help that loved one in terms of their planning. So sometimes it's even, believe it or not a spouse that might be the best person to have the conversation. It might not be a child or even a grandchild. It might be a close friend that is a better person to have the conversation. So you need to think through that. Who's the right person to have the conversation about finances? And the same thing with legal discussions as well. But oftentimes it is a close family member. We want to be empathetic. It shouldn't just be about us. So if we're sitting down, say it's with mom or dad, and they've recently been diagnosed, they're already going to be maybe a little concerned and upset about the diagnosis. And now we're trying to talk to them. Hey, mom, dad, we want to sit down. We want to understand your plans. Where's the paperwork? Where's your money? Where's your checkbook? Not necessarily the best way to start. It may be, hey, mom, dad, we know it's very hard right now. We want to make sure that you're comfortable as the disease progresses. We want to make sure you have your affairs all in order here, and we want to help you do that. Think about your messaging. Think about your voice tone, how you're going to have the conversation, and again, what you want to have in that conversation. I'm going to try to do a little video snippet here, and we'll see how the video comes out. And Steve can come off when I finish this. Steve can tell me if it came out clear enough.
Hey, Aaron, a few people are saying they're not hearing anything.
Huh, that's interesting. They're not hearing anything at all. Okay. Well, basically what Kim was saying that, you know, she was trying to get her mom to get her plans in order. And sometimes hearing it just from Kim wasn't always working out. So sometimes she would use other friends and family to also get mom to, try to get mom to want to talk about, finances in particular. So it can be very difficult. It's one of the most difficult things. And, Mark was sharing actually before we got on, Mark Sweeney, about, the difficulty they were having with in his family with the relative. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that in the Q&A. But it's extremely important to have the conversation. But as I said, please don't wing it. When you have a conversation like this, it's always good to start in a positive manner. That's what I was just highlighting. It's not about, hey, mom, dad, we need to talk about your finances. Mom, dad, we need to know where the paperwork is. No, it's, hey, mom, dad, we know this is difficult. We want to see what we can do to help you. What kinds of questions do you have? We want to make sure that, we have everything in order to make everything easy for you. Whatever it is that's going to be positive for that loved one, because you'll know that loved one better than, of course, anybody. In some cases, you may be the one that's been diagnosed. And if that's the case, you might want to say, your spouse or your children, they may not be very comfortable in wanting to talk about this. And you may have to force the conversation, the one who's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or another dementia. And you can say, hey, I want to talk with you about my finances. And the same thing will happen when we talk about legal. I want to let you know where the paperwork is in case something were to happen. And I want to go over what's, in that paperwork with you. So there's not, there aren't surprises. Again, it's a two-way street here. But communication is extremely important. And it may be with more than just one person. It might be having that conversation with multiple loved ones. And this says activity. Now, I'm going to actually show you a live workbook. I'm going to ask Dan, we have a workbook that goes along with this program. And I'm going to ask Dan to maybe send that to you guys through at least the chat. And we'll also make sure that Leslie has it as well to send to you electronically. And it's a live workbook in that you can literally fill it in on your computer. And I'm going to show you when we talk about financial considerations, we can even do budgeting and whatnot on using this worksheet. But what we're talking about, not winging it, think about it. This little workbook can help you. What are your goals? What is it, the documents that you want to talk about and that you want to review? Think about it in advance, plan it, and maybe talk with other family members, other loved ones about the situation and what else needs to be covered. Because just because you think I think I need to cover X, Y, and Z, there may also need to be A, B, and C. But just the number of the things that we're talking about are highlighted in the workbook that we will share with you. Now, one of the things I mentioned, we're going to talk about financial abuse. And again, when I'm talking with Mark, this was a big issue that was going on within his family. And what I'm going to do, I just want to share a little poll with you guys first. And then I'm going to ask Mark in a minute to come off mute and highlight the example that he was explaining to us and what his family was going through. So the poll question that I'm going to ask Steve to send out is, on average, How much money do Americans age 80 and older lose each year as a result of financial abuse? Think about that. And if you can, answer the poll question that should be, it says untitled poll, and the question should be there, and you can choose which number you think the answer is. And then I'm going to ask Steve if he's able to tell me roughly what we're seeing in terms of the results.
We got over 50% done. So here, I'll share the results with everybody.
Okay. All right. So we're seeing that most people are guessing it's about $15,000, $700. And this is already a couple of years ago. $39,000 on average is what our seniors are losing. And these aren't just seniors with Alzheimer's. These are seniors in general. So think about your loved one. Some of them don't have a lot of money and they're losing on average 40,000. Some are being abused for a lot more. And sometimes we're going to talk about the range of types of fraud that are in play, because sometimes it can be family, sometimes it can be solicitors, but there are a range of different types of abuses. We're going to talk about those abuses, and then we're going to talk about what we can do about them. But I would like to see if we can have Mark quickly share. I'm going to actually, maybe I'll stop the share here for a second and ask Mark if you could just tell us a little bit about what happened with your family.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. So yeah, so in my family, we had a caregiver, was a family member that, we thought was taking care of my mom, given their background and things. And just by a stroke of luck, we got access to her bank account, and the documents were coming to me, and we looked at them. Several $100,000 had been taken from her accounts through forgery and falsification. They bought cars, paying mortgage, paid for college and some other things, and nobody else in the family knew, and neither did my mom.
Yeah, and this is, unfortunately, it's not unique. We're finding in all areas, and this is one of the driving forces for why this program was even created in the first place. So let's talk about some of those other abuses. So what Mark's had is a situation, it's horrible. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. No joke, I was at the gym 2 days ago. A buddy of mine said, I said, where have you been? I haven't seen you in a while. He said, well, we had a situation with my grandfather. It turned out one of our nieces was stealing his money. She was living with him and she was writing checks, and she basically did a second mortgage on the, not a second mortgage. I guess she did, somehow did a second mortgage, had him sign stuff because he has cognitive impairment. And they're about to the bank was about to take over the house when they found out what she had done, and I guess got arrested. But it's happening in all different types of settings. And of course, people living with dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's or other dementias, may be harder to deal with this than anybody else, because sometimes they don't remember. Sometimes they'll just agree with whoever they're talking with. They're not making very good financial decisions, and it can be extremely disconcerting because they're such a target population. So what are some of the signs? Unopened bills, of course. Hopefully we don't get to a point where the electricity or gas is shut off. But one of the most common things we see are unusual or large purchases being made. And that's particularly if you're able, sometimes the spouse seeing what's happening. In other cases, it's just constant purchases being made. An example is I was at the Alzheimer's National Leaders Conference a few weeks ago in San Diego. And one of the speakers was someone who has early onset Alzheimer's. He's actually also a triathlete, but he said he didn't even know he had Alzheimer's until this situation. He loved these particular type of socks, very expensive socks that he wanted for his running, for his triathlete work. And he was making a purchase and he would show his wife and say, look at this, I got my socks today. 2 days later, the next package would arrive and he would go to his wife and say, look, I just got these socks today. And this happened 3 or 4 times in a row. And that's when she realized there was an issue and got him assessed and diagnosed, unfortunately, that he does have Alzheimer's, but he's very positive about it. And he's still planning to do another Ironman, Kona Ironman this coming year. But that's just an example. So that's someone who actually has the disease, is making constant purchases and didn't even realize it. Some people get taken advantage of. And an example here is a person, the video is not, we won't play the video on this, but I'll give you the situation that occurred. An older gentleman, I think he was about 75, 75, living by himself now. His spouse had passed on, and he had dementia. And he got an old car pulled up in front of his house. And a man and a woman who looked a little raggedy got out of the car and they knocked on his door. And they said, hi, sir, could you get us some money? We're really poor. We don't have anything. And he said, well, I don't have any money here at my house, but I do at my bank. And so they said, oh, well, we'll take you to your bank and you can get us money. And he said, I'd be happy to, because as the disease was progressing, he was just more willing to literally give money away. Well, what happened, luckily, he went to the bank. The most he was allowed to withdraw was $200. And the reason was because his daughter had previously, when he was first diagnosed, was put on the checking account. And they made and as well as a savings account. And they created a separate account. So the most he could ever withdraw at one time was $200. So he took that $200, that was the most he got. When he went, they dropped him off at the bank. They're waiting for him. He comes out with $200. They said, I thought you were going to get us like $1,000, sir. And he said, this is the most I can get you. I hope you like it. They took the money from him out of his hand, jumped in their car, and they took off and left him standing there at the bank in the middle of winter. That's the kind of abuses, unfortunately, that are occurring. But they are the kind of fraud as well with, telemarketers and solicitors. We have to be very careful with our loved ones. So say we are the caregiver and we want to do things about this. What can we do? We can talk with our loved one about putting limits on credit cards, and we can contact the credit card company and do that. If something unusual comes in, we have more fraud indicators now that are done through artificial intelligence with a lot of the credit cards, but also putting spending limits on the credit card, because the person who's been diagnosed, they may be the one constantly using the credit card to buy that same item or to buy things that they see on TV that may not be appropriate and are very large bucket items. And they're just being taken advantage of, even from the infomercials. But setting up auto pays for bills so bills don't get unpaid, the garbage bill, the electric bill, etc. Doing as much auto pays as we can to help our loved one, extremely important. As well as what I was saying, putting limits on checking and saving accounts about how much can be withdrawn at any time, and or getting notifications from the bank if some unusual activity is occurring, where not just the person who's been diagnosed, the person who owns that account is being notified, but having yourself, if you are the caregiver or you or someone else in your family, maybe you then have the power of attorney put into place. And we'll talk about some of the legal documents in a little bit, but having that power of attorney where you're also getting notified by the bank that these kinds of withdrawals are being made. So you can help that person from not being taken advantage of. And I want to show you, I'm going to, it says activity here, but I'm going to stop sharing. I want to go to a different document, actually. And I'm going to see if I can pull up this document. Steve, are you able to see this new document?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this is what I believe Dan probably put into chat. This is an electronic document, the PDF, but you can use it and manipulate it. It's basically a caregiver's guide to finances. So what we were talking about before about planning to have the conversation. All that kind of information is here, and you can literally type that into the screen. What I want to highlight, though, here's a little, checklist you can provide that you can go through. These are things to help you work with your loved one, get things in place. More importantly, it's important for us to make sure we're understanding what are the costs, the financial costs. So this gets into financial planning. So you can literally go into this electronic form and you can start putting in, the budget. Do they make, $1,000 a month? Are they getting 1,000 in Social Security? Then you can put in expenses and it will start to indicate roughly what the budget is, because budgeting is very, very important. We're going to get to that here in a minute. But I just want to make sure that you have access now to this workbook, that it's in the chat, and then you will also get access to this vis-a-vis, Leslie, if you want to have it sent out to you. So I'm going to go back out and go back into where we were here. And again, if you have any questions at all as we're going through this, I know it's a lot of information. Please feel free to put any questions you have into the chat. So we're talking about organizing finances, and that's what that middle spreadsheet or worksheet that I was just at. That's where you can start to do this. You can start to look at, okay, what's the income and the spend? So how much money is coming in, whether it's from Social Security, whether it's coming in from other investments, whether it's coming in from a part-time job, and then how much is coming out. And that worksheet has a range of different expenses. You might want to add other types of expenses that you may have that aren't on that list. But the goal here is to better understand the budget that the person has. In addition, what's the inventory of assets and debt? What do they own? Do they own the house? Do they own a car? Do they still owe money on a car? Do we know this? Who are they financing the car from? Understanding what are the assets, what are the accounts, and having that in a particular place that you have access to, as well as the person who you might be taking care of. But having the conversations about what are assets, what are the debts, and having that sooner than later is extremely important. Now, something that often gets underestimated are costs of care. So we want to start to understand, particularly if someone has been diagnosed with the disease, Alzheimer's or other dementia, what are going to likely be the costs? And that we want to start to get those down. And also, what's going to be the cost for the caregiver? Sometimes we forget that we may need to be traveling. We may have a range of other expenses in order to be able to help care for our loved one. And we don't often put that in as part of the planning. It is part of that overall plan, and it is extremely important. People that we talk with that are caregivers say, hey, I know that how much it was costing for my mom's assisted living facility or for her home health care. And I had that budgeted, but I didn't figure out the impact it was going to have on me and my family and our personal finances. So everyone's situation is a little bit different, but it's extremely, extremely important to think through it and do the planning sooner than later. Again, getting things done, who's going to do them? And maybe more than just you. If you are the caregiver, maybe it's other members within the family. If there's siblings, maybe the siblings are sharing the responsibilities, because it's a lot for any one caregiver. Being a caregiver can be, as many of you may know, very tough and very difficult. It can be wonderful, and it's your family member. You're going to do anything you can, but strapping on, just doing it yourself, it can be very hard, both emotionally and physically. So another activity that I won't go through in detail here, is basically going through that spreadsheet or that worksheet that I was just highlighting a few minutes ago. You can go through and you can indicate the income, the spending, the assets, and it will help figure out your budget or the budget of that loved one, as well as what the expenses will be. And it's something that you can update on an ongoing basis. Now, people often ask, well, what are the resources that might be available? And this is another thing when we get to Q&A here in a few minutes that Mark can also help with. This is definitely, I think, more his bailiwick, but there's a range of personal resources, obviously. Someone may have retirement accounts, their property, other savings, but then you have federally funded resources, Medicare Parts A and B and D for the drugs, the medications, compassionate allowance initiative. Some folks may not be aware of what that is, but that is, where if a person has a disability such as Alzheimer's or another dementia, that might be able to get their wait time reduced for determining disability insurance and getting funding sooner than later. So that's a way to do it. I am not an expert on it. I just know about it through this program. And then that's on the federal side. On the state side, there's Medicaid and Medigap. Depends on obviously income levels, and people have to qualify for those. But there's a range of different resources. And I'm going to show you this number again later, but the 800-272-3900 number that's at the bottom of your screen there, the Alzheimer's Association helpline, that's staffed 24/7 by master level clinicians. So if you have a question about any of these kinds of financial resources, even legal resources, you can feel free to call the association at any time, and they will help answer the question. Sometimes, even Dan and I will sometimes even call that helpline to get a question that answered that we've heard in a group like this. But extremely important to get addressed. Now, legal planning. Again, extremely, extremely important. Different type of situation, but it relates to the financial planning. You don't want to wait and do like what Mark and Caroline did. They waited and waited, both financial and legal, and their mom and dad didn't want to then deal with durable power of attorney. They were nervous about signing documents that they probably would have signed a year or two earlier without any issue at all. But as they were progressing with the disease, they're becoming much more suspicious, much more defensive. Things about other documents that we can talk about, living trusts and living wills. Having those things in place sooner are extremely important when we're dealing with someone that has Alzheimer's, dementia, or just in general. Anything we talk about in terms of financial planning and the legal planning is important for anybody. It doesn't mean just for people, of course, with Alzheimer's or dementia. Now, a lot of people say, well, I can just get stuff online for legal documents, and you can get durable powers of attorney, living wills and things like that, templates online, but we still always recommend getting an advice from an attorney as appropriate. Again, a lot of people will go online, and that's how they'll get their documents done and get notarized. A lot of these documents will still, of course, have to be notarized and be legal. And there's guidance when you're completing those templates online. But we'll talk more about that in a minute. But we often recommend still getting guidance from an attorney, because every state is different. Sometimes an individual's state situation is a bit different. So it's always helpful to for getting the professional guidance. So we're going to talk, there's at least to have in place, we talk about, these durable powers of attorney. And what I want to highlight there, let's see if I go into the activity. Now, you know what, I'm going to stop. I'm going to go back to the workbook. These are going to be resources. We're going to come back to these resources in just a minute. I want to go back to our other document here, and I want to scroll down. So organizing legal plan. So we have all this information available to you in terms of, what's a durable power of attorney for finances? What's a durable power of attorney for healthcare? Where this is allowing someone to designate another person to make decisions about their finances when they no longer can. So they may still be alive. Hopefully they are still alive, but they may not have the ability to make good financial decisions. So we have a durable power of attorney in place. So a loved one or loved ones can help make those decisions as, in this case, say Alzheimer's or dementia progresses. A living will, same thing. A living will may express what kind of medical treatment do they want as the disease progresses. And again, it doesn't have to be Alzheimer's or dementia. It can be for anything. We had it for my dad when he had cancer. The living will, indicates the range of medical treatment, what they want. Even we had items for quality of life, but a lot of it had to do with what kind of medical treatment they wanted and what they didn't want. And then there's things like living trust, provides direction about the person's property and assets. Again, that person might be alive. They may have Alzheimer's, dementia. They may not be able to make decisions on their own, but the living trust indicates what they want to happen, what will happen with the person's, assets, etc. So a living trust is extremely important as well to have and have created to deal with those assets and the property that the person has. Standard wills, you'll have an executor for that, but that executor on a standard will doesn't have legal authority during the person's lifetime. They're not going to be able to make decisions while that person is still alive. That's why these other documents are the durable powers of attorney, the living will, and the living trust are so, so important. We have a lot more information that we can provide on that. In fact, Dan, I'm going to ask you, I think we have like the legal brochure. Maybe you can provide that in the document, in the chat as well. And Steve, I'm going to ask you, can you now see the screen back where now it has information about legal and financial resources?
Yes.
Okay, great. So folks, we'll provide this slide, and Dan, I'll ask you maybe if you can put this slide as well into the chat. And again, we'll give all these slides and information to Leslie as well. In fact, we'll make sure that you have all of these slides that were in the overall presentation, and we'll provide you a participant's guide. So you'll have all this in one place as well. So you have the workbook plus all the slides. What we can see here is a range of different types of information and resources to go to, whether you have legal questions or financial questions, or you just want to find out more about getting resources and services. There's a wealth of information. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. A lot of people do that. They'll reinvent the wheel. And the association already has this. All this information is for free, and it's there at your fingertips. So we strongly recommend, to please take advantage, of what is available to you. Lastly, what I want to highlight before we, move into going into the Q&A is creating a backup plan. So oftentimes what we hear from caregivers is that they're doing it, the one daughter or the spouse or whatnot, that they are literally the only backup plan. That's not a good thing. We want to make sure that there's multiple people that might be indicated in some of these legal documents, as well as if we're not available, if one of us is sick or one of us passes, who is going to be the backup and who's going to help make decisions on behalf of mom or dad. Those kinds of things, and they need to be thought through as well. Extremely important. We forget, backup plan as well of where are the documents, where are the medications, where are the account numbers. Sometimes it's good that if there's different siblings, that each sibling has a copy of that information in case one is not available when it's absolutely needed, particularly when it comes to things like medication and a question comes up. So it's important to think about what is your backup plan, even after you have the basics of your financial and legal documents generally in order. Because that's another thing as I mentioned, we hear that people say, wow, one thing I would have done is made sure that we had more people involved in understanding that if I'm not available, we have this person is one legally available and authorized to do something, as well as they know what's generally going on. So extremely important. And I'm going to re-highlight this. This is in here twice in this program because it's so important. If you don't take good care of yourself, you're not going to necessarily be able to take good care of your loved one. And we hear this from time and time again. Caregivers burn out. They need respite care as well. And sometimes certain insurance programs even provide for respite care. And some assisted living facilities will also provide respite care for short periods of time. So it allows families to go away, to get decompress. It's extremely important. But eating well, staying healthy, and this isn't just again for Alzheimer's or dementia. This could be for anyone that is dealing as a caregiver, for anyone that has some type of medical issue, or they're a caregiver for whatever reason. Please get the sleep you need, eat healthy, do the exercise. In the short term, you might be okay, but the long term, you may be really bad. And it's just something we constantly are hearing from caregivers throughout the national capital area, as well as nationally, about what they would recommend to other caregivers. And it's slow it down, think through it, don't reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of resources available, but keep yourself healthy as much as possible. And as I mentioned, there is the Alzheimer's Association. It is available for you 365 days a year, 24/7, that 800-272-3900 number. It's free. These are master level clinicians that are there. They can help. Then you have a loved one who's been recently diagnosed. What do we do? What kind of plan should we put in place? How are we going to navigate this? What are the resources available here in the national capital area or anywhere? They can help. They can help immediately. Not only answer questions, but provide you guidance and templates for plans. You can also go just online, alz.org, right at your fingertips, a whole wealth of information that can be, you can just get on your own. If you want to learn more about Alzheimer's dementia, you want to learn about caregiver support groups, which is something I didn't mention. There's a lot of caregiver support groups just here in the national capital area, because caregivers want to learn from each other. Sometimes they just want to vent with each other. And these support groups, a lot of them are going on for a long period of time. We have many of them, and these are facilitated support groups. Some are done by volunteers, some are done by staff, but throughout the national capital area. So, easily can get involved in that, as well as things like Memory Cafe for those that have been recently diagnosed. And with that, I'm going to go probably off share here in a minute, and I'm going to see if we have any questions that came up in chat, and then also open it up for just dialogue for anyone, myself and or Mark or Dan or anyone here in the group.
Yeah. Well, Aaron, once again, great topic and great information. And Marianne says, care also must be given to the choice of power of attorney and the estate and trust executor chosen. You can't be afraid to choose someone other than the oldest child or the child with financial experience if they're not the one who's most trustworthy and willing to follow through with your declared wishes and won't unduly enrich themselves for services as executor. It is fraud following death. And yeah, that really good point. A lot of times, when I've heard people talk on this topic, a lot of times we sort of feel obligated to have blood relatives be our powers of attorney or healthcare power of attorney or, advanced care. And, sometimes your best friend may be the best person to assign that task to. But the key, I think, is that we all agree it's having some deep conversations with people, because this is a position of a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Both you and I don't remember who you said mentioned that point, extremely important. And I totally agree. And I would imagine Mark saw him nodding and I think agreeing as well. Any other questions that anyone has? And you can feel free to
let's see. I'm not positive, but Jason has his hand raised. So let me see if Jason has a question. But if sometimes people just raise their hand by mistake. But Jason, if you did have a question, I just allowed you to unmute and you could ask your question. Usually that's just a bit of an error there. But
Okay.
you know, Mark, your story is quite compelling, and you talked about you know, this is a family member that committed fraud, and I don't have the statistics right off my head, but I believe the number one group of people who commit fraud against the elders are people that they know.
Yeah, with our family, it was scary because I've got two sisters, and it was one of my sisters who had, you know, my mom was closest to. And the level that she went, she put her name on all the things that were easy, so checking and savings and things like that, where she didn't have to go into the bank. All she had to do was forge my mom's signature, and you know, it was her name, and they did it elsewhere. You know, she did the same thing to put herself on my mom's house. The federal things, Aaron, that you mentioned, the VA and the Social Security benefits and those things, much harder to do that with because they, you know, identification things. We were able to gain control of that. But the thing that we didn't do, which I think, Aaron, was so important that you do this early, is when we tried to put the legal documents in place for my mom, they have a cognitive test. You know, do they understand the complexities of a will? Do they understand the complexity of a trust? The only thing that they would verify that my mom had cognitive ability to do was that she wanted me to be able to take care of her by managing her finances. And I wasn't a financial planner then. So we got the durable power of attorney, but we went to try to put a will in place with the same attorney. And, you know, they've got a benchmark where they have to do it. My mom could not understand the complexities of it. So we didn't have that in place. And that was really a travesty.
Yeah, and Mark, that was a similar situation with my friends Mark and Caroline. They kept waiting to have that kind of, you know, the discussions on financial and legal. And luckily, I guess they thought they weren't going to get approval for some of these documents, but luckily there was enough clarity because during the day, that night they were still having sundown and they could not make if it was later in the day and they got tested, it would not have worked. But the point that Mark and Caroline stressed to anybody that they talk to now is having those conversations as soon as possible once there's the cognitive impairment has been identified. So yeah, it's so hard.
And that Sundowners was kind of what showed us. My mom had been visiting us during the day, and all of a sudden, and we didn't see it. All of a sudden, she'd been a couple days. She went to bed early. One day she stayed up a little later because dinner was later, and it was like a little kid lost in a department store. All of a sudden, she didn't recognize who we were. Was scared to death. I mean, petrified, and I had never seen that before. And that was kind of our wake up call to this. Like, okay, what is this? Because we didn't know. I mean, there was nothing like, you know, Aaron, your program, and Leslie, somebody as caring and compassionate as you are on these things. That didn't exist when it happened to my mom, and we were thrown into it, and it was an absolute chaos. You think a bowl of spaghetti is what it was, and everything was reactional. You know, we did not have this plan in place, and it devastated my family.
Aaron, thank you so much. I'm just going to jump in with Mark really quickly. Mark, thank you for sharing that. You know, we on a part one, we really, I think, scared a lot of folks, you know, and intentionally, because we'd rather scare you in an hour here and kind of have that awareness of the potential fraud and the finances that are ahead of us, and the importance of knowing, you know, what are the warning signs of dementia, and how do you have these conversations early so that, you know, we can work towards being prepared. And I really appreciate you know, humbling yourself to share, you know, that this is how it can completely go wrong. You know, you clearly changed your profession because of this, and, you know, decided to help others. So just kind of bouncing to that, you know, here, like, we talked about cost of care, and I love how Aaron really drew that bigger picture of it's not this set amount for a caregiver. You know, you really need to think bigger. What is my time off work going to, if I've decided to be the caregiver, if I've decided to do a daycare, what is the cost of gas to go back and forth over, 5 days a week? Really looking at this kind of bigger picture of cost of care, financially, emotionally, spiritually, physically. I know, Mark, you do a lot of planning now. Can you share a little bit about your experience with mom and, the cost, not just with the fraud abuse, but once you did kind of, all right, we've got to get care for her. What do we do?
Yeah, okay. Great set, introduction on that one, Leslie, because the cost of what you're going to, pay for it to take care is, in emotional dollars and real dollars, it's very small. Because if you knew how long they were going to live, you could figure out how much it's really going to cost. And you don't. That we know it's going to happen, but for some people, it's going to be very short. For my mom, it was over 12 years. So and I use my example. I had young kids coming up that were going into high school. So we're trying to save for college. My wife and I are trying to, put money away for our retirement. And then when my mom did go in, we found out that her resources were gone, that her personal resources. So we had to rely on federal resources and state things. And her pensions combined were just enough that she didn't get the state assistance. She was just outside the range. And those are fixed dollar amounts that we couldn't do. They were already there. So I had to pay for it. So my kids' college education, we had to, dip for buckets from there. I wasn't able to fund my retirement for many years because it's over $100,000 if you're going to be in a place, usually in a home, and they're going to be full assisted living and it's memory care. And then the emotional of the things in there for my kids, because my kids see me going through this. What do they think about it now? So my kids have sat down with me and go, Dad, this goes on to you. I'm putting you on a ship and it's going to be like a Viking funeral. Forget it. And it's impacted my other sister's family as well, because she was the caregiver that was there all the time. And her husband at the same time, he was in a wheelchair. He was a judge and things, but she was still a caregiver for her husband. Her family is impacted emotionally. So she's finally able to go and take a job away from home. The first time she's been able to do that in 25 years after my mom passed. So the costs isn't just what you're going to pay up front. It's all the other things because things are going to come up. And when you start out, it's a fixed cost. You think it is, but then the medicines that Aaron, you mentioned, all the medical and things that come in, there's no way you know what those are going to be. You can calculate it, but it's going to grow more than inflation. So it's going to be lost dollars that you're not going to have a thing. It's going to be lost time. And that emotional side of it, of being able to take care of yourself, you do not underestimate that at all, because this will be one of the toughest things you ever do in your life if you don't plan. And the planning only means you got the money together. Believe me, the emotional stuff's still there. But if you don't have that, then it's a double whammy.
Thank you, Mark. And that kind of leads right into that segue of care for the caretaker and taking care of ourselves, and fighting against the guilt that many of us feel when we do put ourselves first in an attempt to still take care of others. So I know we're at 7 o'clock. I wanted to see if there's any questions that have popped up. There is one in the
it says it's important to get, Jane says it's important to get a letter from the doctor about the cognitive deficits and inability to make appropriate, safe, informed. Is it important to get a letter from the doctor about an individual's cognitive deficits and their inability to make appropriate, safe, informed decisions?
So Mark, I don't know if you want to, from a financial perspective and planning perspective, are letters from doctors required?
Oh, sorry, Aaron.
No, go ahead.
So we got that from my mom. You know, we had, because when we found out this, she was still driving a car. So, you know, the doctor did a test and we got a letter for it. It's important you have that because you need to show it to folks if you can. It helps them understand your situations. They may not act on it if you don't have the other legal documents, though, because the legal documents are ones that they have to go with. And it's very important you do that. So, if, you know, as Aaron alluded, if you do it online, that's a great way to get some foundational things. But the proof is in the pudding when those legal documents have to work. So if you did it online and, you know, you live in Florida and you're using, you know, LegalZoom or something like that, Florida documents may not work in Florida. And Maryland, you know, if you're in Maryland, they may not be the same because each state has their own laws for this. Very, very state specific.
Yeah, and another aspect that we often hear from people is that due to HIPAA regulations and requirements, you can't just ask the doctor, your loved one's doctor, for a letter of anything because they may not be able to share information with you unless you're already got the document to allow you the durable power of, you know, for healthcare, attorney for healthcare. If that's not in place, then that doctor may not be willing to share anything with you. So that's another aspect of that.
And
I see from Charles.
Charles.
Did you see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Charles says, as a power of attorney caregiver, I have a very difficult time getting access to bank accounts. One bank refuses access to the patient's safe box. What to do? The funds will eventually be needed for providing care. Well, and Charles, this is a heart-wrenching experience that you're going through, but hopefully all of us listening on the call will recognize this is why it's so important to have conversations and make plans in advance. Any guidance you can all give to Charles?
I've got a suggestion for you. So I don't know if you're local to the bank where you are. If you are, I found much greater success, and I think most people will if you go in and you do it personally. I had to create a relationship with a bank manager so that they could help me they guided me through their process because it was a quagmire. And just because they had the letter didn't necessarily mean it got on the account and more importantly, stayed on the account. So the bank went through some changes. The document that we had wasn't there every time I went and talked to somebody. So we had to, you know, go through some hoops to make sure it stayed on there, and the personal help was a big deal.
Mark, I wanted to add that I know we're going a little over, but we are going to be working with the Alzheimer's Association and Steve throughout the year, kind of to deep dive in a couple more of these columns that we've talked about. In June, we're going to be going over effective communication strategies. So kind of diving in a little deeper into how do we have these conversations that are so important, and am I the right person to have it? You know, and then we are also going to be discussing responding to dementia-related behaviors, which will help in communication, but also help in self-care. And then the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's and dementia. On the first part one, we did a poll, and there was about 50% of the viewers were already caretakers, 50% expected to be caretakers within the next 5 years. So I think these would benefit everyone kind of moving forward. It's always good for a refresher as well. And all of those events can be found on talloaksal.com/no. We don't have the links up yet to register, but keep checking back. And I think if we don't have any more questions, I'll let Steve close it out.
Yeah, let's see here. A quick glance. Krista says the topic are fantastic. Thank you. And Marianne says after permissions and pulse are completed, know where they are and have them with the person when sent to the ER or to a new community. Great advice, Marianne. And all right, well, this was another wonderful discussion. I hope everybody has a great evening. Just a reminder, we recorded this, so I'll send that to Leslie, as well as it'll be at Retirement Living Sourcebook's website tomorrow morning. And all right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.